is for Module 16 in biology, and that module is going to cover reptiles, birds, and mammals. So this video will cover reptiles, and then the next one we will do birds and we will do mammals. So just to give you an idea of where we are going in this video. So the class that we are going to cover in this video is class Reptilia. And then within that class, we are going to do several orders. The first order that we will do is order Squamata. And that order includes lizards, snakes. Those are the two main ones that we will do in order Squamata. Then we will do order Testudines. And this includes turtles and tortoises. And then lastly, we will do order Crocodilia. So those are the first two orders. We'll do the last one. The last order, again, these are all members of class Reptilia. We will do class Crocodilia. And that includes alligators and crocodiles. Okay, so that gives you an idea of where, that's kind of an outline of what we are going to do today. So let's begin by, like we have done with other classes that we have studied, let's begin with some general characteristics of class Reptilia before we actually start talking about different orders. Okay, so the first thing that is true of class Reptilia is that all members of class Reptilia are covered with tough, dry scales. So they all have tough, dry scales. Most of the members of class Reptilia live in drier climates, and so these dry scales, their purpose is to prevent water loss and prevent the animal from drying out. You'll remember that we said that fish are actually covered in a coating of mucus. They live in a wet environment, so that is appropriate for their environment. But when you live in a dry environment, you need some way to prevent water loss, because in a dry environment you're going to have a lot of evaporation. So a lot of water would be lost through the skin if they didn't have these tough, dry scales. The other things that the scales do is that they also provide insulation. So they help to keep them warm. And then the scales in reptiles do not grow, so they need to be shed in order for the animal to grow. So they shed them to grow. And actually, what happens in reptiles is that the new scales are formed underneath the old ones, so that there's never a period of time when they don't have a covering, because the new ones are grown underneath, and then when the old ones are shed, the new scales are already there. Okay, so tough, dry scales is one characteristic of class Reptilia. A second characteristic is that they are ectothermic. Okay, and we've already talked about that term. So that means that they do not have an internal mechanism to keep them warm. So that's why you will see reptiles sunning themselves to stay warm, and then in the hottest periods of the day, they will actually go into the shade or go underwater to keep them from getting too hot and getting overheated, which can happen, and they can die as a result of that. Okay, so they are ectothermic. Another characteristic is that they breathe with lungs. And this is the only way that they can breathe. So remember, in the frog, they had lungs, but they could also breathe through their skin and their mouth. And they, at some point in the larval stage of their development, they actually had gills. But for class Reptilia, the only way for them to breathe is through lungs. So that simply means that even though there are members of class Reptilia that live in the water, they still breathe through their lungs, so they have to surface in order to fill the lungs with air and exchange gases. So they breathe with lungs. Members of class Reptilia have a 3-chambered heart. And in their 3-chambered heart, they have 2 upper chambers. So they have 2 atria, and they have 1 ventricle. So the lower chamber is called the ventricle. And the one thing that's we saw a similar thing in the amphibians, but the thing about this ventricle is that it is partially divided. And so in many ways, it is like a 4-chambered heart. It's not fully divided into 4 chambers. It's just a partial division. So it's almost like a 4-chambered heart. And then the last characteristic of all reptiles is that they have an amniotic egg. So I want to spend some time talking about an amniotic egg and looking at that. So for class Reptilia, the fertilization takes place in the female. So the egg is in the female and it is fertilized inside the female. And then once that egg is fertilized, then there is a protective shell that forms around the fertilized egg. And the reason for that protective shell, remember that like the eggs that we saw that were raised by, that are laid by fish or amphibians, frogs, they do not have a protective shell around them. They're laid right in the water. So this protective shell around the egg, it does two things. One is that it allows oxygen and carbon dioxide to get in and out. So oxygen and CO2 can move in and out of the egg. But water cannot. So oxygen and carbon dioxide are able to move. They're very small openings called pores. So oxygen and carbon dioxide can move in and out. Water cannot. So it allows the egg to be waterproof. And it means that the egg can develop on land. So the egg or the embryo develops on land, not in water, like we saw with the amphibians and fish. Okay, so let's look now. Let's take a look at an amniotic egg, and to do that. Well, I'll go ahead and put up some of these parts that we're going to look at, and then we'll look at the drawing and talk about each of these. So maybe I'll stop there with these first two. Okay, so the first, we're first going to look at two things in the amniotic egg. The first is called the amnion, and we'll see that it goes around the developing embryo. So the developing animal is called an embryo. And so the amnion is this sac that goes right around that developing embryo. Similar to a mammal, so when mammals develop, they are enclosed in an amniotic sac as well. And then we'll look at the yolk sac, and the yolk sac surrounds the yolk. And the yolk is it's just a bunch of nutrients. So it provides the nutrients for the developing embryo, and as the developing embryo is consuming that yolk, then it's going to disappear. It's going to slowly disappear over time. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this picture. Okay, so the two parts we've talked about. So the green part here, this is the developing embryo for a reptile. And then we said that the membrane that goes around that developing embryo is the amnion. Okay, so this that I'm circling right here is the amnion. It goes around the developing embryo, and then you'll see that inside that amnion there is a fluid that is called amniotic fluid. Okay, so I'll go ahead and write that term up here. So the amnion contains amniotic fluid. Okay, and then the second part that we've looked at so far is called we talked about the yolk sac and the yolk. So here that I'll outline in blue is the yolk sac, and then inside the yolk sac is this yolk, and the yolk is, as we said, is what provides the nutrients for the developing embryo. Okay, so the amnion, the amniotic fluid, the yolk, and the yolk sac. Okay, then the next two parts that we will look at are called the allantois. And then we will look at the chorion. So the allantois is just a bundle of blood vessels. So those blood vessels allow for the embryo to get oxygen and carbon dioxide, and also allows for them to get rid of waste. And then the chorion it goes around, it's a membrane that goes around everything. So let's go ahead and look at that picture again. We'll go back to red. So here is the allantois right here. So this would just be the bundle of blood vessels, and you can see that it attaches directly to the embryo. So the embryo can get oxygen, and also it can excrete waste that goes through the blood vessels and then gets eliminated. And then enclosing everything is this membrane here that is called the chorion. Okay, so the chorion and the allantosis. One other thing that I will mention in the egg then is the albumin. So the albumin is the white part of the egg, the white of the egg. And it contains chemicals that protect against bacteria and other pathogens. So remember, we said that the shell of the egg has small pores in it that allow oxygen and carbon dioxide to move across the shell, but those pores are not, they're too small for water to pass through. However, bacteria and other pathogens may be able to pass through that shell. And so the albumin contains chemicals that that fight against bacteria or other pathogens and therefore protect the developing embryo. Besides that, the albumin also stores protein and water. So it supplies water and protein to the developing embryo. Okay, so if you look at picture here, then you can see the albumin. Let's see. Let me go ahead and erase the rest of this stuff. So all of this here is the albumin. It's the white part of the egg. When you break into a chicken egg, you see the albumin, that's the white part of the egg. And then all of this is surrounded by the shell, the outer shell, that again we said has very small pores in it that allow things to, allow some things in and allow other things and prevent other things from going in. Okay, so that is that is an amniotic egg, and it is, all reptiles have amniotic eggs. Okay, so now we're going to start working our way through some of the different orders. And as I said, we're going to do order Squamata, and we will do order Testudimes, and we will do order Crocodilia. Okay, so let's start with order Squamata. And that order includes lizards and snakes. So what I want to do is maybe just make a list of characteristics of lizards and snakes that help us to see how they are different from each other. Okay, so lizards have 4 limbs. Snakes, as you know, have no limbs. Lizards have ears and they can hear. Snakes are deaf. Now, even though they are deaf, they can feel vibrations, and that helps them to find prey. But they don't have a sense of hearing like the lizards. The lizards have scales, at least some scales, on their entire body. Snakes have scales on their bellies. And those scales that are on their belly are called scutes. And they, what they allow the snake to do is they allow the snake to be able to move on their stomach on the ground. Okay, so scales on the entire body, scales just on their belly. Okay, a few more differences that we'll list here between lizards and snakes. So lizards have eyelids and they can close their eyes. And snakes have no eyelids, so they don't close their eyes. And even though they don't close their eyes, they don't really have that great of a sense of sight, so they don't see all that well. But their eyes are always open. Let me say a few more things about, so those are the differences. Let's concentrate on a few more things about the lizards, and then we'll do a few more things specifically about the snake. Okay, so lizards, some examples of lizards are like an iguana, Komodo dragon, some of you have probably seen a gecko. The gecko, when you've seen geckos that are able to climb up walls, that is because they have these tiny hairs on their feet that allow them to stick to surfaces. Gila monster, horned toads, those are all examples, other examples of lizards. One interesting example of a lizard is a chameleon. And a chameleon they use camouflage, so they're able to change their color to match their surroundings both as a way to enable them to better sneak up on prey, but also to prevent predators from detecting them. The chameleons have a very long tongue, and they use that tongue to catch prey. And in some chameleons, their tongues can be longer than their bodies. So chameleons are very interesting creatures. Okay, so that's the lizard. Let's go ahead and say a few things more about snakes before we finish up with this particular order. So the snakes are carnivores. So they will eat things like rodents, they'll eat insects, they'll eat other snakes. And usually the snakes almost always swallow their prey whole. So not whole, W-H-O-L-E, whole. Their jaw is not attached to their skull. So that allows them to, they have a special bone that is called the quadrate bone that allows them to open their mouth very wide, and therefore they're able to get things in very large things into their body, and they will swallow them whole. As you are aware, there are some types of snakes that are venomous, and in terms of venomous snakes, well, actually, let me back up here. So some snakes are constrictors. So the way that they capture their prey is by constricting them. So an anaconda, python, a boa constrictor. So they would constrict their prey and then still consume it whole. But then other snakes bite, and there are generally the biting snakes either have short fangs or they have long fangs. If they have short fangs, then they actually chew. An example of a short fanged would be like a coral snake. And when they do that, they inject a neurotoxin. And so a neurotoxin it attacks the nervous system, and it can lead to things like blindness, paralysis, or suffocation, because to breathe, you have the muscles have to receive information from the nervous system. So neurotoxins come from short-fanged snakes. The neurotoxins, they act very quickly. So you begin to see the effects if you have been, if an animal is bitten by a short-fanged snake that injects neurotoxin, you begin to see effects very quickly. So the coral snake is one example of a short-fanged snake. Then another example is the long-fanged snake. And a long-fanged snake, they actually, the way that they inject their venom is by striking, not chewing. So this would include the vipers, and vipers are copperheads, rattlesnakes, water moccasin is a viper. And the type of venom that long fangs inject is called a hemotoxin. So the hemotoxin, hemo means blood. So a hemotoxin attacks the red blood cells. And so essentially, it attacks the red blood cells and the blood vessels. So you are essentially destroying the circulatory system. Okay, so and the hemotoxins are much more serious, but they are slower acting. So it takes longer for the hemotoxins to take effect, but their effects tend to be much more deadly. In terms of a snake's smell, they have nostrils, but they also have a special organ that is called Jacobson's organ. And the combination of the nostrils and the Jacobson's organ is actually in their mouth. And the combination of these, they basically what they're doing is they are detecting chemicals in the air. So when a snake is seen sticking out its tongue, it's sampling the air to detect these chemicals, which is then picked up by the Jacobson's organ in the mouth, and then that information is sent to the brain, and it's it's interpreted as smell. And the nostrils also are used to sample the air. So they do have a pretty keen sense of smell because of the Jacobson's organs in their nostrils. Okay, so that's all we'll say about snakes. Let's go on now to the order Testudines. And this includes turtles and tortoises. So let's talk a little bit about differences between them. So turtles live in the water. They can come out of the water, but they live in the water, and tortoises live on land. Neither one of these, so both of these have no teeth. So they use their beaks to snap food. They also, especially the turtles, since tortoises are on land, this would not apply to them, but the turtles have their nostrils that are high on their noses. So that means that they are able to keep most of their body submerged and still be able to breathe. So keep body submerged, but still be able to breathe. Okay, so I think that's all we're going to say about the turtles. Your book mentions like some of the very large turtles, like the leatherback sea turtle, which can grow up to be about 1,500 pounds. Okay, then the last thing that we will do today is order Crocodilia. And this order includes the alligators and crocodiles. What's the difference between them? Well, an alligator has a thicker snout and a crocodile has a like a more narrow snout. When an alligator closes its mouth, the teeth are inside, so you can't see the teeth. Mouth closed, teeth are not visible. But in a crocodile, when the teeth don't fit into the mouth, so when their mouths are closed, you can still see the teeth. So teeth don't fit into closed mouth. So the teeth are still visible when the mouth is closed. both of these, both the alligator and the crocodile, have their eyes and their nostrils on top of their heads. So if you've ever been someplace, if you've ever been to a place where you can see, not eggs, eyes, where you can see alligators and crocodiles in the wild, you'll often just see a pair of eyes and the nostrils sticking up, and that allows them to move through the water and sneak up on prey. And then the last thing that we will say about order Crocodilia is that they are, this order is oviparous. So they lay their eggs and they bury them in rotting plants. And then as those plants are decomposing, that produces heat. So the mother alligator or the father does not need to attend to the eggs because the decomposing plants produce heat so that they can develop. Then after about 2 weeks, when the eggs hatch, then the mother will go to the nest and she will help them to dig out of the rotting plants where the eggs were laid, where the eggs were buried. So she doesn't attend to them much during their development, but she will return when they are hatching. Okay, so that finishes up class Reptilia, and next week we will do class Aves and class Mammalia.